Hi, friends. Bill Hobson here. Welcome into the Fore Golfers Network podcast and a little video presentation from Michigan Golf Live. Our featured guest today is the renowned golf course architect, Tom Doak, as he is leading the effort to resurrect and kind of renew a property that was his first ever course build. It's called High Point Golf Club near Traverse City, Michigan. And as we are speaking, Tom also just got the news that he's been tapped to build the 10th course at Pinehurst, their first all-new course build in 30 years. Pretty heady stuff, and I know you'll enjoy our conversation with Tom Doak here on the Fore Golfers Network podcast video edition. Well, I want to kind of take a dive into this High Point project because, well, you tell me, is it fair to come out and just label it a passion project from the very beginning?
Well, I like to think all of my projects are that, but High Point started that. It was my first design. I was 25 years old when they hired me to do the golf course, and it was a rare opportunity at that age to show what I could do. And I lived on the project for 2 years, and I shaped all the greens myself on a bulldozer. It's the only course that was like that. After that, I started enlisting more help to build golf courses. But for my very first one, I wanted to do all that, and so I've missed it a lot since it's been closed. The golf course closed in 2000 after 2008. My original client, Mr. Hayden, had passed away, handed it down to his family, but they weren't really golfers and they didn't know what to do with it. And boom, the recession hit right away. And, they weren't making money at it, so they closed it. And at the time, I talked to some of my clients and friends to try to save it. Both Mike Kaiser and Herb Kohler, among other people, said, yeah, we'd put a little money into that, but you can't overpay for it. I mean, it's a terrible time. It's got a lot of deferred maintenance on it. You can't pay what they're asking, and they didn't want to negotiate. So that fell through, and that would have hurt a lot more if I hadn't built a few famous golf courses in great places around the world by that point. But I still missed it a lot. It was a very personal thing to me. And, so most people know that, part of the golf course is a hops farm now. But they actually only, I was up there a couple of years ago, a local magazine was doing a story on it. And, I would go out there and walk every once in a while. And, the hops farm basically only covers the front 9 of the old course. And like the old 17th hole as well. When I went back a couple of years ago, the farm manager was out there and I said, you haven't really torn up anything in the back, or, is that planned for more hops in the future? And he said, no, I don't think so. Originally they thought they were going to do that, but the hops business is not an easy business to make money because people's tastes keep changing. And then, you're always chasing that. It takes a while, if you want to grow a new variety, it takes 3 or 4 years before you have a crop. So they weren't expanding. And I thought at the time, well, okay, so the old back 9 is still mostly there with, it's dirt again, but it's mostly there. And there is more land that they own to the east. But I've been busy doing other projects in other great places. And, was I really ever going to get it together myself to find investors and do it? Probably not, because it's, that's a full-time job too. And then about a little more than a year ago, somebody called me and said he was interested in taking a look at reviving the golf club. He'd actually been trying to negotiate to buy Kingsley Club just south of Traverse City. And unbeknownst to him, there were about 4 different groups trying to do that. So he lost out on that. but he'd spent a lot of time up here and he really loved the area. And a couple people said to him, you know, Tom's really interested in reviving High Point if you're interested in taking a look at that. So all of a sudden I had a client to actually do it.
And so life comes full circle. But I gotta have you jump in the Wayback Machine with me for a minute. What on earth permission slip is given to a 25-year-old kid to do what you did back then? How did that ever happen?
Well, obviously I was 25, but I graduated high school at 17. I went to landscape architecture school at Cornell. You know, I got around. By the time I was 25, I'd seen 90 of the 100 best golf courses in the world. I just traveled relentlessly to see everything and bring in all these ideas. And after I got out of school and I had a postgraduate scholarship to go to the UK for a year and see all the stuff over there. And then when I came back, I'd worked for Pete Dye one summer while I was in college, and I went back working for Pete and his sons. But Perry Dye, the older son who I was working for, was based in Denver, and he was starting to get work in Asia, you know, blowing down the sides of mountains in Japan to build golf courses. And I didn't necessarily know what minimalism was yet, but I knew it wasn't, you know, that wasn't going to be the kind of golf course I wanted to build on my own. And I just naively thought, well, you know, I've got more chance of finding a good job on my own than I'm going to get to work with a great piece of land working for Perry, because he's going the other direction. So I quit working for the Dyes, and I really didn't have anything lined up to do. When I was in college, one of the places I'd gone to see was Crystal Downs. And before it was a very well-known golf course. I just knew that it was a Mackenzie course, and somebody I'd met in Chicago had played it and said, that's really good. You should go see that. So I wrote to the club, and they said, well, you know, there won't be too many people around in the spring, but you can play with our professional, Fred Muller. So Fred and I played like a couple weeks before I graduated from college, and got to be fast friends. And I came back to, you know, that next summer, when I still didn't have a job or any real prospects, I came back up and spent a few days with Fred at Crystal Downs and really got to know the golf course well. And then like a week or two after I was there, Doug Grove, who was the pro at Grand Traverse Resort back then, called Fred and said, yeah, I know somebody that wants to develop a golf course over here, and they're not going to pay a big name architect, and I just don't want them to hire the same guys that do everything else up here. Do you have any ideas? And Fred said, yeah, he was just here. So that was my introduction to the Haydens at 25. And, you know, it's true that, like, you know, who's going to hire a 25-year-old kid to build a golf course? Somebody who has no experience developing a golf course.
Right.
So they're probably, you know, I'm probably not the most prepared architect yet. They're probably not the most prepared client. That's how these things fit together sometimes. But, you know, it was a very busy time then. People were building golf courses all over. So, you know, they weren't going to get any of the big names or pay that kind of money. And you know, I had the advantage. I didn't go to him and say, oh yeah, I'm the best designer in the world. I'm going to design something great for you. It's like, I think it's a beautiful piece of land. I can build this for you, and it's going to cost this much to build, because I had that experience and I could actually get on the machine and do it. And that was a huge difference in selling yourself at a young age.
Yeah. And you know, Tom, just about 12 feet to my left here in my studio, there's a box of cassette tapes, just because nobody has a cassette player anymore, but there's a box of cassette tapes.
I threw away some old plastic floppy disks the other day.
Exactly. There's nowhere to even play them or to insert them. Those cassette tapes contain the audio of 20 plus years ago of me doing my show and also broadcasting college football and thing. And if I pop one of those in, I'm cringing at the young me. right?
Hmm.
I'm wondering if there's a part of now the experienced veteran Tom Doak that looks back at what 25-year-old Tom Doak may have done. Is there anything that, now you look at it and you go, what the heck was I thinking? As a guy who's now made a few trips around the block.
Yeah. Well, my first book, The Anatomy of a Golf Course, which is kind of a primer on golf course design. I wrote that not just before High Point, but not long after, like 1991. So it's been in print for 30 years. And, I don't go back and look at that often, but when I do, I'm surprised that, my ideas really haven't changed that much over 30 years. I had most of the design, my philosophy of design really was pretty strong from a very young age. But, the work should keep getting better because you just keep getting more practice at doing it. And plus you get more talented people to help you. Like I said, I mean, I was never nearly as good on a bulldozer as the guys that work for me.
Hmm.
There's just so much faster. And plus they're another set of creative eyes at how it'll all fit together. And, you utilize that to your advantage. So yeah, we're better at building stuff now, but the underlying design, I don't think that's really changed that much. And, what High Point was pretty radical for when it was built. It won't have the advantage now, when it didn't have to be compared to Pacific Dunes and Terra Iti and the other things I've built since. It was really different than what anybody else was building in 1988, 89. Now it won't have that going for it, but it has all of our experience going for it now. So hopefully we can do something that's even better.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that you will do that. But I'm curious, as you now go to this piece of property that has been certainly not a golf course for quite some time, what's the journey like? You enter into, as you described, one of the nines as being basically dirt, the other nine untouched territory. Are you considering this a start from scratch, or is there a part of Tom Doak that thinks, even though I'm using a different piece of land for this nine, I want it to resemble the nine that was there? What's the goal here?
Yeah, that's interesting. And I've been talking with the client about that too, and what his goals are and what he really wants to do. But to me, I mean, part of the story is we've really only got 6 holes from the old golf course that are intact. What was the old 10th to 15th holes, which if you played the golf course back in the day, that was the most memorable part of the golf course. And those are still just sitting there. One of the reasons we think we can build it in one season is because we can start putting irrigation in it on those 6 holes again the day we start. They're mostly still there. Nobody tore them up. So we'll go be starting on the next holes, but it's like we built those 6 holes last year. we have much more of a head start than that. But the rest of it's a new project. It's different land, and it's actually, the funny thing is when Rod Trump is the client, no relation to the famous President Trump, but when he called me, I said, you've got 2 options. You could try to restore the whole old golf course, but the hops farm, took over that front 9 and tore it up quite a bit to do what they did. So that would be hard to fix. And you wouldn't have any of the old cherry trees or anything that were around those holes. It'd be very barren. And it costs you more because you're not only going to pay for the land, but you're going to pay for the crop that's on it. So I don't think you want to do that. There is, in addition to the back 9, there's another 150 acres to the east that they bought right after we started working on High Point. And they actually had me lay out another 9 holes there in 1988, thinking that if it was successful, they might wind up with 27 holes. So I had this old plan. I still actually had the plan in my files of that old 9, and I kind of remembered it. And So I just knew that we had enough land there to build 18 holes without getting into the hops farm, which is what we're doing. And, funnily enough, I'm pretty much using the same routing for those holes that I did in 1988. So that's still the old me. I did look at changing it, but it's like the back nine of the old course. It's kind of hilly, and it's like there aren't a whole lot of different ways you could go. And it's like, no, I this is pretty good. I like this. And
It fascinates me as a guy who really appreciates architecture, but would never pretend to know it very well, right? And I don't want to come across like I do. You may recall that this last fall, we had Jerry Matthews with us up at Grand Hotel, where he actually passed away during his visit.
Yeah, be careful about it. Be careful where you're going with this.
Yeah, but he brought with him a bunch of plans just to show to Paul Albanese, who was with us at the hotel, because the two of them were doing some things together, because Jerry still wanted to do work. And so he brought up stuff with him, and he wanted just some time alone with Paul where they could go over some drawings and things like that. Yeah. And I bring that up because it seems to me like for those of you who have this stuff in your blood, you keep the plans forever. And even if you don't have the paper version at your disposal at a given moment, it's right up here. And you can picture where you were 30 years ago or what. I mean, so this stuff is always part of you, isn't it? It sounds like it sounds to me like, Tom, if you needed to, you could take out a napkin and start sketching the things that you did all those years ago.
I've never been very good at drawing, honestly. So that part would be, but yeah, is it all in my brain? Yes, it is. And, years ago when after Pacific Dunes opened, they were having the Curtis Cup there. And Mike Davis at the time was still the championship setup guy for the USGA. So he was out with me and we were looking at the hole locations that they were going to use for the 3 days of the event. And we walked up on the first green and I said, well, that's still that's 3% there. So that's pretty steep if you're going to put it there. So you're probably going to want to keep it to the back. And he's like, he's got his little like level with him and he puts it down and it's 3%. He's like, you remember that? You built, because
like Rain Man.
6 or 7 years since I built the golf course. And I was like, yeah, that's what we do. That's the part where I spend all the time, really. So yeah, those kinds of things I remember, and how the topo map and how the thing fits together. Yeah, that's in my brain, and it probably will be forever. I used to be famous for being able to remember all the famous courses that I've been to. And I was playing with Mike Kaiser a few years ago, and he walks up to me in the middle of one of the fairways, and he goes, Tom, do you remember the 12th hole at Dornick? And I'm like, par 5 with the little knob in front of the green. And Mike, he really had no question about it. He just turned to the caddy and said, see?
So with all of that knowledge rumbling around in your melon, in the end, what's your dream for High Point? What do you see happening? And do you yet know from an ownership standpoint, are they planning on it being public, private? What's its future?
They're planning on it being a national membership club, so not public anymore. And I've kind of I've been trying to talk through that and resolve it and get comfortable. I got plenty of friends up here that are going to be bummed if they can't play it a lot. So I'll have a few privileges for bringing people around to, again, that, in addition to their normal membership. But, for me, the dream is kind of the same as it always was. I mean, even when I was a kid, I envisioned that, I didn't know at the time if I would, well, I didn't, when I built High Point, I didn't own a home in Traverse City. I got married a couple of years after that, and we bought a house here when we were doing Black Forest, thinking, we don't know if we'll be here long term or where the work's going to take me. But for now, we can afford to buy a house here, and it's a lovely place, and we'll be here for a while. And it just morphed into, I've lived in Traverse City for 35 years. So now the dream really is like it was when I first bought a home here, I'm going to get to the point where I don't want to travel as much as I've been doing. I mean, I'm really already there, but I've still got a bunch of work to do right now. But at some point in my life, it'll be nice to have a place that people come to visit me. And, I think that'll be a part of High Point as long as I'm alive. And the best, the best analogy I can make, I was with Ben Crenshaw a few years ago, and I've known Ben for a long time. But my son was interested in going to film school, and the University of Texas is one of the best film schools. And, and I said to him, well, I have a really good friend in Austin. So we went down there for a couple of days and saw the school. And then, Ben Crenshaw picked us up and took us out to Austin Golf Club, which he and Bill built about 10 years ago. But really, I do believe they don't really say it directly, but it is the one golf course that Ben did the most work on. And, I mean, Bill tried to let him do as much of it as he wanted to do, because he figured it's in his hometown. He's going to be there a lot. He should really, I'm going to just let him do it all, except for what he asked me to help with. And, that's kind of how I see High Point too. When we were going out there, Ben, it's a pretty good drive. It's, it's out in the new part of Austin. So it's a good half-hour drive from the campus or Ben's house. And as we're going out there, I said to him, how often do you go out here? He said, pretty much every day when I'm home. And I don't know if I'll be at High Point that much, especially not in the winter, but I'll be there a lot, and that will mean a lot to me.
Well, part of the buzz around it, of course, is because it involves you and your team, and you've developed such a reputation, but it's also an excitement about the resurrection of a property that was really quite popular. I mean, people really loved it. So I'm hoping that ownership realizes that, and you can win the day and at least have some sort of a public opportunity to be a part of it, certainly in the early days. I'm interested if you want to give any teasers as to what's coming at Pinehurst 10. I mean, when they add a course down there, it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, they have. I hadn't really thought about it, because they restored number 2 a few years ago, and they had Gil Hance totally redo number 4 a few years ago. But Tom Pashley said to me the other day, this is the first new course we've built here in 30 years. And I was like, oh yeah, because they actually just renovated number 8, the last course they built. It was old enough that they needed to do a lot of turf work on. They regrassed the whole thing and did some work to the bunkers and stuff while they were at it. But yeah, it's been a long time since they built another golf course from scratch. They actually started on this site 20 years ago, and they were just getting started clearing, and 9/11 shut it down, and they never went back to it. So, it's a big site. I think that there will be 2 golf courses there eventually. It's a couple of miles south of the resort, so it's pretty close. But it's going to be I think it'll be like its own little thing eventually, with like a separate lodge of some kind there. Part of the land was the old pit golf course that Dan Maples built, which was kind of like, it was Tobacco Road before Tobacco Road, but it was a very kind of low budget, narrow version of that. So it was really difficult. And once Tobacco Road opened, that stole its thunder, and it was and everybody went, well, this is way too narrow.
Has anybody ever come to you in the last 3 years and said, hey, we are hearing some pretty cool things about this concept called the loop? Why don't you come do that for us over here? I mean, would Pinehurst ever do that? I mean, have you ever had anybody else suggest reversible courses?
I've talked about it with 1 or 2 people, mostly Lou Thompson for a while. He'd bought Forest Dunes kind of not out of bankruptcy exactly,
Close.
but when it was for sale, for
pretty close,
not very distressed sale.
Yeah.
And, he was looking for more opportunities for that. And, every time he would call me like, does this work for a reversible golf course? And I'm like, no, no, Lou, you can't you can't have the golf course getting narrower toward the green and then have to hit over a residential street to get to the other green. So, it's not a concept that'll work very many places well. And, obviously I'm not going to, I'm only going to ever do that again if I think I can do it better than we did the loop. And we did learn a lot from that, like some of the things I like, even though I'd thought about the concept for a long time, some of the things I like about it most, I hadn't figured out before we started. Mostly that the best holes are not the ones, the easiest thing to do is just like keep kind of going in the same general direction and put the tees over to the side so you can use it to go either way.
Yeah.
But the more interesting greens happen when you're coming in at like 90 degrees, you're changing direction. So, that makes even the simplest kind of rectangular green, if you're coming in this way one day, you're coming in that way the other day, and it's, instead of long and narrow, it's wide and shallow. You don't even recognize it as the same green. And plus you're looking at a completely different backdrop.
Yeah.
You're not always looking way on down the golf course because you're changing direction there. You could have trees behind the green from one direction and not from the other. So I love that concept, and I might do it again, but like I've told a couple people, I've got 2 or 3 other ideas, not exactly like that, but big concepts that I'm kind of hoping someday I find the right place to do this. And so I'm probably more interested in getting a chance at one of those than doing the loop again.
Well, it's a conversation piece, that's for sure. And that's why I kind of thought somebody would come along and say, hey, we'd like to have a conversation piece like that as well. If they had an expansive piece of property, back down at Stream Song or something, where they just have land everywhere without homes. And
right.
Kind of
right.
So,
there have been, other architects have done some things. I've heard of at least 3 or 4 other reversible projects, but none of them are like 18 holes and fully, playing 1 through 18 one day and 18 through 1 the next.
hey, there's only one mad scientist, and I'm talking to him. So, so Tom, best.
The funny thing is that it's not like I'm the only one that ever had that idea. That idea was in Tom Simpson's book 90 years ago. Mm-hmm. And when I proposed it for Forest Dunes, Lou Thompson actually talked to Tom Weiskopf, because he'd done the first golf course, and said, this is what we're thinking about doing for the second golf course. And I'd known Tom for a long time, and he said, yeah, wow, I've always thought about doing something like that too, but I could never work out how the greens would work, because you'd want a big green for one hole, but the other hole you'd want a smaller green or something like that. He's like, yeah, if anybody can figure that out, Tom will figure that out.
And he did. Tom, best estimate, you talk about High Point. When is a tee being put in the ground for the ribbon cutting opening day? How long does all this stuff take?
Well, like when we started the loop, I said to Lou Thompson, the only way we get the golf course built in 1 year is if we get a head start the previous fall. We have to get 6 holes shaped so that somebody can start putting in irrigation on those right away the next spring, so that the 1st of June, the first day it's warm enough to get seed to germinate, you're ready to seed the first hole. For High Point, we didn't get that head start, but we had a head start because those holes have been there for 30 years. So we think we can get the thing built in 2023 and all seeded by Labor Day.
Wow.
And if we seed it by Labor Day, we'll be starting to hit balls around next summer. I don't know if he'll officially open the club until 25, because I don't know if the clubhouse or anything else will be ready. The clubhouse is in a different spot. All the rest of that is different. And there's a lot to do there.
Yeah.
But, I am pretty confident we'll be hitting balls around there by Labor Day of 2024.
So generally speaking, not necessarily specific to High Point or any other specific property, but from an architect standpoint, how long does it take before a golf course plays with the character you envisioned it having? Everything's firm and fast the first year. You're trying to figure out if it's going to settle. Sometimes you want it to be that way, like the loop's firm and fast all the time. But there are other places where that's not what the end result will be. How long before you would like go back and say, now it's right where I wanted it?
Some of it depends on the site. I mean, obviously, there's two parts of it. It's what it plays like and what it looks like. What it looks like, if you've got a lot of natural vegetation and you're only touching the parts that you need to change you need to turn this into fairway, but everything outside the fairway is staying pretty native, like it will up here, then it's going to look pretty mature the day it opens. There's not, you're not waiting for stuff to grow in around the edges. Playability is partly the soils. It's partly just, do you get the right season? I mean, people always worry about the greens and, are the greens really going to be mature? But those grasses are bred for, they're bred to be cut that high. You start cutting them that low almost as soon as they're up. So, the greens and the greens are like, you spend a lot of your attention and a lot of your money on 2 or 3 acres of the golf course. They're always good opening day. What's not good is kind of like, the right rough over there on number 4, the part that you're not focused on. That's the part that's going to look a little rough coming out of the gates. And that's almost inevitable. But, up here, I remember playing the back 9 at High Point, which we built first back in the day. We had that all seeded on time that first summer, and I was playing it the next summer while we were finishing the rest of the holes. I mean, it came in, if you planted it just the right time, it's very good a year from then.
This is exciting stuff. I love it when passion projects take place, and I can hear the passion in your voice for not just for this one, but for what you still do. And I think my last question for you is how much longer is Tom Doak going to do all this stuff? This isn't High Point's not the drop the mic moment, right? And head off into the sunset, or is it?
If it had happened 3 years earlier, it might have been, but in the meantime, because there was nothing else going on, and I would have thought about that, but in the meantime, the pandemic I didn't have a lot to do for a couple of years. The pandemic was odd. If you were in the middle of building something, then you had to keep building it. I mean, you weren't going to just abandon it. So some guys stayed really busy. We were kind of not working, we're not building anything at the time. So everybody sat on their hands and waited. And so we didn't have a lot to build those 2 years. And, I'd been thinking about, I'm 61 now. So I just started to think about, well, how much longer am I going to do this? And I had 2 years of like testing out some of my retirement, and I didn't like it very much. So when, a year ago, we just started getting calls about new jobs, because the pandemic, golf boomed in the pandemic. And all of a sudden, all these people that have been sitting on their hands for a long time are like, yeah, let's actually pursue building a golf course. And I just had a glut of phone calls, and it's still happening. I mean, I get, we went from hardly getting any calls about new jobs because there just weren't that many, to getting probably 2 good calls a month about new projects. And I can't do anywhere near that, but I'm signed up for 8 or 9 new projects over the next, probably take 3 or 4 years to build them all. So I'm not retiring right away. I'm not dropping the mic after High Point, but but at some point here, I will slow down or change the business model some. And the hardest part of this business, and it will still be the hardest part going forward. If I just said, well, after this, I'm only doing 1 project at a time, that would mean sitting on my hands a lot of the time, because when you sign up something, you don't know how long it's going to take to get to construction. That's the one part of it we don't really control, but when the client doesn't know, they don't know how long it's going to take to get the permits and for it all to come together. But whenever it does, they want us to be ready to go. So, so that means sometimes everybody wants to go at once and you're really busy, and sometimes there's just nothing going on, and it's hard to plan for. So I don't know that I'll just restrict myself to just one thing. But I've also got like a ton of young people that I've trained that are out, some of them are competing with us for these jobs now, and some of them are trying to make a little bit of a name for themselves. And, at some point, I think I'd like to get to where I'm helping out, like I'll help with the routing plan, but beyond that, I'm not going to commit to a lot of time to come work on it. That's yours, and, if I've got time and you want me to come, I'll do that, but it's really yours at that point.
Yeah, and as you get to where you are in this position of the head of the department, the emeritus professor, you don't have to do all this stuff. You can delegate a little bit more.
I don't think people understand that. Some of the, when you play one of our newer courses and you're like, that green is so wild, why do you do that? Somebody else actually, that's their idea. The people that work for me, the reason they work for me is because they get to contribute and, do some of their own things. And if I like them, it stays. If I don't think it works well, I'm going to edit it or tell them no. But some of the coolest stuff, it's not really mine, other than I said, let's build a cool green in this spot right here. Give it a shot. Let's see what you got. And so they're all ready to do it on their own. And they probably don't get as much credit as they deserve for what they've been doing the last few years.
Well, Tom, I'm looking forward to seeing this progress of High Point, kind of charting it as we go. I'm hoping to walk it with you sometime in the spring or in the summer. I'm fascinated by the process, and I'd like to spend a few moments with the artist as the canvas is being painted on. But thanks for giving us a little behind the scenes feel for your passion project. And anytime in my home state we have good news like this, we want to celebrate it. And if you need anybody to go to Pinehurst with you, I'm usually available, and I hang out there for a few days will be just fine by me. But
don't sleep on that. That's going to happen really quickly too.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, congratulations on that and on High Point and everything else that's happening. And thank you so much.
All right, Bill. Nice to talk to you.